He realized too late that the woman he'd ignored for 3 years was the only thing holding his world together, and she'd just stopped trying. Elias Varrick thought marriage was a transaction. Sign the papers, maintain the estate, produce an heir. Simple. Clinical. Leora Hale was supposed to be forgettable, a placeholder in a grand house that demanded a mistress. But the night she stopped meeting his eyes across the dinner table, something cracked in the foundation of everything he'd built. This is the story of a man who learned control means nothing when the one person you dismissed walks away. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what happens next will break you. The cliffs of Cornwall didn't forgive mistakes. Elias stood at the eastern window of Varrick Hall, watching the Atlantic hurl itself against the rocks below. March wind rattled the glass. The sky was the color of old bruises. He'd grown up with this view, the violence of it, the constancy. It made sense to him in ways people rarely did. Behind him, the estate manager droned on about crop rotations and tenant complaints. Elias wasn't listening. He was thinking about the woman currently sitting in the drawing room, hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for permission to breathe. His wife. The word still felt strange, even after 3 months. "Mr. Varrick?" Elias turned. "What?" "The drainage issue in the eastern fields. Shall I—" "Fix it." Elias waved him off. "That's what I pay you for." The man left. Elias remained at the window. Marriage had been inevitable. The Varrick line demanded continuation, and at 34 he had delayed long enough to earn whispers. So he'd done what made sense, selected a woman from a respectable but financially struggling family, made a reasonable offer, signed the documents. Leora Hale became Leora Varrick on a Tuesday in December. It rained. She was 23, quiet, plain enough not to inspire gossip, pretty enough not to embarrass him at county functions. Her father had debts. Elias paid them. The arrangement suited everyone, except possibly Leora, but that hadn't seemed relevant at the time. He found her in the drawing room exactly where he'd left her an hour ago, reading. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression made him stop. It wasn't fear. Leora had never been afraid of him. It was worse than that. It was nothing. "The vicar's wife is coming for tea tomorrow," Elias said. "Yes. Mrs. Penrose mentioned it this morning." "You'll need to be present." "Of course." She returned to her book. Elias stood there, obscurely irritated by the dismissal. He was the one who ended conversations, not her. "What are you reading?" Leora glanced up again, surprise flickering across her face before it smoothed into polite blankness. "Poetry. Tennyson." "Waste of time." "Probably." She didn't argue, didn't defend her choice, just agreed and went back to reading. Elias left, feeling like he'd lost an argument that never happened. Mrs. Penrose had been running Varrick Hall since before Elias was born. She was 70, sharp as broken glass, and the only person alive who could make him feel 12 years old. She cornered him in his study that evening. "The girl is miserable." Elias didn't look up from his correspondence. "She has a name." "Mrs. Varrick is miserable," Mrs. Penrose corrected, not budging an inch. "She barely eats, doesn't sleep, wanders the house at night like a ghost." She's adjusting. To what? A husband who speaks to her twice a week? A house with no friends and no purpose? She has purpose. She's the mistress of this estate. Mrs. Penrose made a sound that could have stripped paint. "Is that what you think a wife is? A title and a dinner seating?" Elias set down his pen. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to remember she's a person, not furniture." "I'm aware she's a person." "Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you treat the hunting dogs with more consideration." The words landed harder than they should have. Elias felt his jaw tighten. "My relationship with my wife is not your concern." "Someone needs to be concerned. That girl came here expecting a marriage. What she got was a mausoleum with a pulse." She left before he could respond. Elias sat in the dark study for a long time after that, staring at nothing. Leora learned the rhythms of Varrick Hall quickly. Breakfast at 7. Elias read the newspaper and didn't speak. Lunch at noon, usually alone because he was out on the estate. Dinner at 6, formal and silent except for the occasional question about household matters. By 8, Elias retreated to his study. By 9, Leora went to bed in a room 3 doors down from his. He visited her bedroom once a week, always on Thursday. It was efficient, impersonal. He was never rough, but he was never kind either. Afterward, he returned to his own room. They didn't speak about it. This was marriage. Leora had expected loneliness. She'd been alone most of her life, youngest of 4 sisters, overlooked and underestimated. Her father had gambled away their security. Her mother had died when Leora was 16. By 23, she'd become very good at not expecting much. But this was different. This was loneliness with a witness. She could handle neglect. She'd survived worse. What hollowed her out was the proximity of it, being ignored by someone who slept 3 doors away, who sat across from her every morning, who touched her body once a week like he was checking off a ledger entry. She started taking walks. The cliffs were dangerous in March, but Leora found she didn't care much about danger anymore. The wind up there was violent enough to drown out thought. The sea was loud enough to swallow the small, trapped sounds that sometimes tried to escape her throat when she was alone. She never cried. Crying required hope that things could be different. Leora had stopped hoping the second week of marriage, when she'd tried to ask Elias about his childhood, and he'd looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "Why?" he'd asked. "I thought, I'd like to know you better. You know everything relevant." And that was that. So now she walked, and read, and performed her duties with mechanical precision. She smiled at the vicar's wife. She approved weekly menus. She wrote polite letters to distant cousins. She existed in the margins of her own life. It was bearable. It had to be. Spring arrived with more rain and less fanfare. The estate woke up, lambing season, planting schedules, repairs to winter damage. Elias was gone more, which meant Leora was alone more. She didn't mind. Alone felt safer than the alternative. One afternoon in April, she encountered him in the library. It was pure accident. Elias rarely used the library. Books were decoration to him, not substance. But there he was, standing by the window with a leather-bound volume open in his hands, frowning at it like it had personally insulted him. Leora froze in the doorway. Elias looked up. "I didn't know you were here." "I can leave." "No, stay." He closed the book. "Do you know where this came from?" She stepped closer. It was a survey of Cornish folklore, decades old. "Your grandfather collected local histories. That shelf is all regional documentation." "How do you know that?" I read the catalog. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite interest, but close. "Why?" Leora shrugged. "There's not much else to do." He studied her for a moment longer than comfortable. She made herself hold his gaze, even though everything in her wanted to look away. "You spend a lot of time in here," he said finally. "Yes." "Reading?" "Yes." "Seems pointless." There it was, the casual dismissal that had become the background radiation of her existence. Leora felt something crack inside her chest, something small but structural. "Probably," she said quietly. She left before he could see her hands shake. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the way Leora had looked at him in the library, like he'd struck her, like she'd expected it. He hadn't done anything wrong. He'd stated a fact. Reading was pointless if it didn't serve a function. That was basic logic. So why did he feel like he'd kicked a dog? He got up, poured whiskey he didn't want, stared out at the dark gardens. When he'd chosen Leora, he'd done so carefully. No strong personality to clash with his. No grand expectations to disappoint. No emotional complications. She'd seemed ideal, biddable, quiet, suitable. But lately, she'd gotten quieter. Not in a peaceful way. In a way that felt like absence. He thought about Mrs. Penrose's accusation. "You treat the hunting dogs with more consideration." That was absurd. He provided for Leora. She had security, status, everything a woman in her position could want. What more was there? The question sat in his chest like a stone. By May, the household staff had noticed. Leora heard them sometimes, whispers cutting off when she entered rooms, pitying looks from the maids. She pretended not to notice. Pretending was becoming her strongest skill. Mrs. Penrose didn't pretend. "You're fading," the old woman said one morning, cornering Leora in the still room. I'm fine. You're a ghost in your own house. Leora kept measuring out dried lavender. That's dramatic. Is it? When's the last time you laughed? When's the last time you spoke more than 10 words at dinner? There's nothing to say. Mrs. Penrose caught her wrist, gentle but firm. Listen to me. I've worked in this house for 50 years. I've seen 3 generations of Varrick men. They're all the same, cold, rigid, incapable of seeing what's right in front of them. But they can learn. If you let yourself disappear, he'll never know what he lost. Leora pulled her hand free. Maybe there's nothing to lose. You don't believe that. I'm starting to. The shift happened gradually, then all at once. Leora stopped trying. She didn't make a decision about it, didn't wake up one morning and declare herself done. It just happened. One day she realized she'd stopped waiting for Elias to ask about her day, stopped hoping he'd notice the flowers she'd arranged in the hall, stopped expecting anything at all. The relief was staggering. She'd been carrying hope like a weight she didn't know she could put down. Now, without it, she felt lighter. Emptier, yes, but lighter. She stopped meeting his eyes at dinner, stopped lingering in doorways when he was nearby, stopped reading in the drawing room where he might see her. She became efficient in her duties and absent in everything else. The household ran smoothly, the accounts balanced, the social obligations were met. But Leora herself receded into the background of her own life like morning fog burning off. Elias noticed. Of course he did. It was June when he finally said something. You've been different. They were in the dining room. Leora was cutting her food into precise, small pieces. Different how? Distant. She almost laughed. He was lecturing her about distance. I'm exactly as I've always been. No, you're not. Leora set down her fork, looked at him directly for the first time in weeks. What do you want from me, Elias? The question clearly surprised him. His mouth opened, closed. I don't, because I've spent 6 months trying to figure that out. I've been quiet. I've been obedient. I've stayed out of your way, and none of it matters because you don't see me anyway. She picked up her fork again, hand steady. So I stopped trying to be seen. Silence. Then, that's not fair. Probably not, but it's true. She went back to eating. Elias stared at her like she'd turned into something unrecognizable. Maybe she had. After that, something changed in the house. Not between them exactly, but around them. The air felt heavier. Conversations had edges. Elias started watching Leora in a way he never had before. Not with interest, but with something closer to unease. She'd stopped being easy to ignore, and he didn't know what to do with that. One night in July, he found her in the garden at midnight. She was sitting on the stone bench near the roses, no shawl despite the cold, staring at nothing. You'll catch pneumonia, he said. Maybe. Elias sat beside her, not close, but closer than usual. What are you doing out here? Existing. That's not an answer. Leora turned to look at him. In the moonlight, her face was all shadow and bone, beautiful in a way he'd never noticed before, sad in a way that made his chest hurt. You want a real answer? Her voice was soft, but there was steel underneath. I'm trying to remember what it felt like to matter, before I came here, before I became background noise in someone else's life. You're not background noise. Then what am I? The question hung between them like a challenge. Elias didn't have an answer. Leora stood. It's late. I should go inside. Wait. She paused. I never meant... He stopped, frustrated by his own inability to articulate what he felt. This isn't what I intended. What did you intend? A partnership. An arrangement that worked for both of us. It works perfectly for you, Leora said quietly. I'm not sure you've noticed it doesn't work for me. She left him sitting in the dark garden, alone. August brought heat and tension. Elias was short-tempered with the staff, distracted during estate meetings. He caught himself listening for Leora's footsteps in the hall, tracking her movements through the house like some kind of surveillance he didn't understand. She was pulling away, and he hated it, hated that he cared, hated that he'd never cared before and now couldn't stop. One afternoon, he walked into the library and found her reading by the window. Sun caught in her dark hair. She looked peaceful in a way that made something in his chest constrict. Leora. She glanced up, waited. Elias realized he had nothing to say. He'd just wanted her to look at him. Never mind, he muttered, and left. He heard her soft exhale as he closed the door. It sounded like disappointment, or maybe relief. He couldn't tell anymore. By September, the whispers had gotten louder. County gossip traveled fast, and Varrick Hall was always of interest. People were starting to notice that Mrs. Varrick looked thinner, quieter, that she smiled less and spoke even less, that the marriage everyone assumed was standard-issue aristocratic coldness might actually be something worse. Elias heard it at the club. "Shame about your wife," someone said over brandy. "Seems like a sweet girl." The implication was clear. You're breaking her. Elias went home and found Leora in the music room, playing piano badly. She'd told him once she'd never learned properly. He'd filed it away as irrelevant information. Now he stood in the doorway and listened to her fumble through something that might have been Chopin, and felt like he was watching something die in real time. "You never told me you played," he said. Her hand stilled on the keys. "You never asked." "I'm asking now." Leora stood, smoothing her skirts. "It's too late for asking, Elias." "What does that mean?" She looked at him with those dark, steady eyes that used to drop whenever he entered a room. Now they held his without flinching. "It means I'm done hoping you'll see me. I'm done waiting for you to care. I'll be your wife in name. I'll run your house and attend your dinners and fulfill every obligation. But I won't break myself trying to earn something you're incapable of giving." "And what is it you think I'm incapable of giving?" "Anything real." The words landed like a slap. Elias felt anger rise, clean, familiar, easier than whatever else was churning in his chest. "You knew what this marriage was. I knew what you told me it was. I didn't know it would feel like drowning." "That's yet true. It's true, Elias. And the worst part is you don't even see it. You genuinely believe you've done nothing wrong. That providing a roof and a title is enough. That I should be grateful." "Shouldn't you?" Leora laughed. It was the saddest sound he'd ever heard. "I was grateful, for about 6 weeks. Then I realized I'd traded one kind of invisibility for another." She moved toward the door. "Excuse me. We're not done talking." "Yes, we are." She left. Elias stood alone in the music room, fists clenched, breathing hard. For the first time in his adult life, he felt completely, utterly out of control, and he had no idea what to do about it. October came with storms, the kind that battered the cliffs and turned the sky the color of iron. Leora loved them. The violence felt honest. She spent more time outside, walking in weather that made the staff nervous. Mrs. Penrose stopped lecturing her about it. There was something in Leora's face now that discouraged interference. She was changing, hardening, becoming someone who didn't need anything from anyone. It should have made things easier. It didn't, because the harder Leora became, the more Elias couldn't stop thinking about her. She'd become a splinter in his mind, constant, irritating, impossible to ignore. He found himself tracking her moods, her movements, the slight changes in her expression that he'd never noticed before. When had she stopped smiling entirely? When had her hand started shaking at dinner? When had he become the kind of man who made his wife disappear? The questions circled like crows. One night, he found her in the library again, curled in the window seat with a blanket and a book. Rain hammered the glass. She looked small, alone. "You're always in here," he said. "It's the quietest room in the house." "Quiet from what?" Leora set down her book. "From you." The honesty of it was brutal. Elias stepped inside, closed the door. "I want to understand." "Understand what?" "Why you hate me." "I don't hate you, Elias." Her voice was tired. "I don't feel anything about you anymore. That's the problem." It would have hurt less if she'd screamed it. He sat across from her, unsure what to do with his hands. "I didn't realize." "Yes, you did. You just didn't care." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Leora pulled the blanket tighter. "You married me because I was convenient, because I wouldn't make demands or cause trouble, because I'd be easy to forget. And I played my part perfectly. So don't tell me you didn't realize. You got exactly what you wanted." "And what did you want?" The question surprised both of them. Leora looked away, throat working. I wanted to matter to someone, just once. I wanted to be more than an obligation or an afterthought. I wanted... She stopped, shook her head. It doesn't matter now. Tell me, why? So you can fix it? Make it right? She laughed bitterly. You can't fix 6 months of loneliness with one conversation, Elias. You can't undo the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering what was wrong with me. You can't make me unknow that you'd replace me tomorrow if it was convenient. That's not... It is. Be honest. If I died tomorrow, you'd mourn the inconvenience. Then you'd find someone else. Someone quieter, easier, more forgettable. Elias felt something crack in his chest. Stop. Why? It's true. It's not. Then prove it. They stared at each other across 3 feet of space that felt like miles. Finally, Elias said, I don't know how. Leora's expression softened into something that looked like pity. I know. That's the tragedy. She left him sitting in the library, surrounded by books he'd never read, in a house that suddenly felt like a prison. November was when everything broke. Leora received a letter from her sister, inviting her to visit for the Christmas season. It was the first real contact she'd had with her family since the wedding, an escape hatch she hadn't known she needed. She accepted without consulting Elias. He found out when Mrs. Penrose mentioned it in passing. She's leaving? He looked up from his breakfast, coffee forgotten. For 6 weeks. She'll be back after New Year's. She didn't tell me. Mrs. Penrose's look was withering. Did you expect her to? No. He hadn't. That was the problem. When Leora came down to breakfast that morning, Elias was waiting. You're leaving. She paused at the threshold. Yes. For how long? 6 weeks. That's unacceptable. Leora set down her teacup with a click. I'm visiting my family. I don't need your permission. You're my wife. You have obligations. And I've met every single one. I've run your house, attended your dinners, smiled at your guests. I've done everything you've asked and more. I'm taking 6 weeks. You'll survive. Elias stood. We need to discuss this. No, we don't. Her voice was level, final. I'm leaving on Friday. I'll be back in January. That's all. Leora. What, Elias? What do you want? Because for 6 months the answer has been nothing. So forgive me if I don't believe you suddenly care now that I'm leaving. That's not... It is. You care because it's inconvenient, because it disrupts your routine, not because you'll miss me. You wouldn't even notice I was gone if the house wasn't running perfectly. That's not true. Prove it. Tell me one thing about me that isn't written in the marriage contract or the household ledger. One thing that shows you see me as a person instead of a function. Silence. Leora's smile was broken. That's what I thought. She walked out. Elias stood in the empty dining room, fists clenched, and realized with dawning horror that he couldn't answer her question. He didn't know her favorite color, didn't know if she liked music or dancing or whether she'd wanted children, didn't know what made her laugh or what scared her or what she dreamed about when she lay awake at night 3 doors down from his room. He'd married her 6 months ago, and he didn't know her at all. Friday came too fast. The carriage was already loaded when Elias came downstairs. He'd spent the night pacing his study, rehearsing arguments that dissolved the moment he tried to speak them aloud. Now watching the footman secure Leora's trunk, he felt something close to panic tightening around his ribs. She emerged from the house in a traveling coat he'd never seen before. Dark green wool, simple but well made. Her hair was pinned up, her face composed. She looked like a woman going somewhere, not running away. That made it worse somehow. Leora. She stopped at the carriage door, didn't turn around. Yes? We should talk. We've talked enough. No, we haven't. He moved closer, aware of the staff pretending not to watch. Stay, just for one more day. Let you what, Elias? Now she did turn, and her eyes were clear, empty. Say whatever it is you've decided needs saying, make promises you won't keep. I've heard it all before. From my father mostly, but the words are the same. I'm not your father. No, you're worse. He had the excuse of addiction. You're just indifferent. The words hit like a physical blow. Elias felt his jaw clench. That's unfair. It's accurate. Leora pulled on her gloves, each finger deliberate. I'll be back in January. The house won't fall apart without me. Mrs. Penrose has been running this place since before either of us was born. This isn't about the house. Then what is it about? The question hung between them. The morning was cold, breath visible in the air. Somewhere a crow called, harsh and lonely. Elias opened his mouth, closed it. He had no answer that wouldn't sound like a lie. Leora's expression softened into something that looked like pity. Again. That's what I thought. She climbed into the carriage. Elias watched her settle against the seat, arrange her skirts, become someone leaving rather than someone staying. The footman moved to close the door. Wait. The word came out rougher than intended. The footman froze. Leora looked at him through the open door, waiting. I don't want you to go. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her in 6 months. Leora's smile was sad and small and knowing. I know, but wanting me to stay isn't the same as wanting me, Elias. You'll figure out the difference while I'm gone. The door closed. The carriage pulled away. Elias stood in the drive until it disappeared around the bend, swallowed by November fog and distance. Behind him, the house waited, cold and perfect and utterly empty. For the first time in his life, Elias Varrick felt alone. The first 3 days were easy. He threw himself into estate work with the kind of focus that had always served him well. Ledgers needed updating. Tenant disputes required arbitration. The western fields needed drainage inspections before winter set in properly. He worked until midnight, fell into bed exhausted, woke at dawn, and started again. It was fine. He was fine. The house ran perfectly without Leora. Mrs. Penrose managed the staff. Meals appeared on time. His shirts were pressed. Everything functioned exactly as it should. By the 4th day, something started to crack. He came down to breakfast and found the table set for one. It shouldn't have mattered. They'd barely spoken at meals anyway. But the single-place setting looked wrong. Accusatory. He ate standing up, reading correspondence he didn't care about. The 5th day, he noticed the drawing room was different. The flowers Leora always arranged were gone. The piano was closed. The book she'd been reading, Tennyson, he remembered now, Too Late, was no longer on the side table. The room looked exactly as it had before she'd arrived, like she'd never been there at all. That night, he found himself standing outside her bedroom door. He hadn't been inside since the wedding night. She'd chosen furniture, arranged things, made it hers. He'd never asked what she'd done with the space. Never cared. Now his hand was on the doorknob and he couldn't make himself turn it. What was he looking for? Evidence of her? Proof she'd existed? He went back to his own room and didn't sleep. By the end of the first week, Mrs. Penrose cornered him in the hall. You look terrible. Elias kept walking. I'm fine. You're not eating. You're not sleeping. You snap at everyone who speaks to you. She planted herself in front of him, immovable. This is what I warned you about. I don't recall asking for your opinion. Too bad. You're getting it anyway. Her voice was sharp enough to cut. That girl left because you gave her no reason to stay. Now you're rattling around this house like a ghost, and you still don't understand what you lost. I understand perfectly well. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you're angry she had the spine to leave. Not sorry, not regretful. Just angry she made a choice you didn't control. Elias felt heat rise in his chest. You're overstepping. Someone needs to. You're too stubborn to see what's right in front of you. She softened slightly, just enough to hurt. Leora didn't leave to punish you, boy. She left to survive you. There's a difference. She walked away before he could respond. Elias stood in the empty hallway, fists clenched, breathing hard. He wanted to be angry. Anger was clean, familiar. But underneath it was something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like shame. The second week was worse. He started noticing things. Small things. The library smelled different, less like the lavender sachets Leora had tucked between books. The garden path to the cliffs showed no fresh footprints. The music room stayed silent. He found himself listening for sounds that weren't there. Her footsteps in the hall, the rustle of her skirts, the soft sigh she made when she thought no one was listening. He'd never paid attention to those sounds before. Now their absence was deafening. One afternoon, he walked into the library and found the window seat empty. Just cushions and light. No dark-haired woman curled up with a book, looking peaceful in a way she never looked around him. He sat down where she used to sit. The cushions were cold. He didn't know how long he stayed there, staring at nothing, feeling something hollow and awful expanding in his chest. It felt like grief, but that was ridiculous. She wasn't dead. She was visiting her family. She'd be back. Wouldn't she? The question lodged in his mind like a splinter. What if she didn't come back? What if 6 weeks turned into permanent? What if she'd finally had enough? The thoughts circled like wolves. Elias stood abruptly, needing to move, to do something. He couldn't just sit here drowning in absence. He went to the stables, Motsum. Riding had always cleared his head. The physical exertion, the wind, the simplicity of controlling a powerful animal. It made sense in ways people didn't. He took Phantom, his black gelding, and headed for the cliffs. The November sky was the color of steel wool. Wind cut across the headland with enough force to sting. Elias pushed Phantom harder than he should have, chasing something he couldn't name. When he finally stopped, they were at the clifftop overlook where Leora used to walk. He'd seen her up here once, months ago. She'd been standing at the edge, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the sea like it held answers. He'd thought it was melodramatic then, self-indulgent. Now, standing in the same spot, he understood. The violence of the ocean matched something inside him. The constant crashing, the way the waves threw themselves against the rocks and lost every time but kept coming back anyway. It was relentless, honest. He thought about Leora standing here, alone, cold, trying to feel something other than the numbness he'd created. How many times had she come up here? How many times had she stood at this edge and wondered if disappearing would be easier? The thought made him feel sick. He'd driven her to this, to isolation so complete she'd sought out violent weather for company. He'd taken a woman who'd already been overlooked her entire life and made her invisible in her own home. And he'd called it a successful marriage. The wind howled. Phantom shifted nervously beneath him. Elias turned back toward the house. That night he did something he'd never done before. He opened Leora's bedroom door. The room was dark, cold. He lit a lamp and stood in the doorway like a trespasser. It was smaller than he'd imagined. She'd chosen the blue room, not the largest guest suite, not the one with the best view. A modest space that asked for nothing. The furniture was simple. A bed, a wardrobe, a writing desk by the window. She'd brought almost nothing personal. No photographs, no trinkets, just books. Stacks of them on the desk, the nightstand, the floor beside the bed. Elias moved closer, reading titles in the lamplight. Poetry. Philosophy. A botanical guide to Cornish plants. A volume on medieval history. A novel he didn't recognize. These were her companions, paper and ink, characters who couldn't hurt her. He sat on the edge of her bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. The blanket was thin. She must have been cold at night. Why hadn't she asked for more? He would have provided them. But she hadn't asked, because asking required hope that he'd care enough to answer. He picked up the book on her nightstand. The pages fell open to a pressed flower, something purple and delicate. Lavender, maybe. She'd marked a poem. He read the first lines. I have been half in love with easeful death. Keats. Of course. Longing and melancholy wrapped in beautiful words. Had she read this at night, alone in this cold room, while he sat 3 doors down working on ledgers and never once thought to check if she was all right? The question sat in his chest like a stone. He stayed in her room for an hour, maybe more, just sitting in the space she'd occupied, breathing air that didn't smell like her anymore, trying to understand what he'd been too blind to see. When he finally left, he didn't close the door. The third week, something broke inside him. He stopped pretending to work. The estate could manage without his constant oversight. He'd built systems specifically so it would run smoothly. Now those systems mocked him, proof that he'd designed a life that didn't need anyone, including himself. He wandered the house like a ghost, found himself in rooms Leora had occupied. The drawing room where she'd read, the music room where she'd fumbled through piano pieces she'd never learned properly, the breakfast room where she'd sat across from him every morning, growing quieter by degrees. He'd thought her silence was contentment. Now he understood it was surrender. Mrs. Penrose found him standing in the conservatory at midnight, staring at nothing. You're scaring the staff. Elias didn't turn around. How? You're acting like someone died. Maybe someone did. She's visiting family, not buried in the churchyard. I know that. His voice was rough. But the woman who left here isn't the woman I married, and that's my fault. Mrs. Penrose was quiet for a long moment, then softer. What are you going to do about it? I don't know. That's the first honest thing I've heard you say in weeks. She left him standing among Leora's abandoned plants, things she'd tried to grow, given up on, let die. He'd never noticed them before. Now they felt like evidence. The letter arrived during the 4th week. Leora's handwriting was neat, impersonal. She asked about the estate, mentioned her sister's children, said she'd extended her visit through Christmas. She'd be back in mid-January now, 7 more weeks. She signed it. Regards, Elias Varrick. Not yours. Not love. Just her name and his. Elias read the letter 4 times, looking for something between the lines. Some indication that she missed the house. Missed him. There was nothing. She wrote like a clerk filing a report. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his desk drawer. Then he pulled it out and read it again. The words didn't change. The absence in them remained absolute. That night he got drunk. It wasn't something he did, losing control, clouding his judgment, but he pulled out the whiskey his father had collected and worked through it methodically, chasing numbness that wouldn't come. Instead, everything got sharper. He thought about the wedding, how Leora had looked, nervous, hopeful, trying to smile. He'd thought it was bridal jitters. Now he realized she'd been trying to see something in him worth hoping for. She'd tried for weeks, months, and he'd given her nothing. He thought about the night in the garden when she'd told him she was trying to remember what it felt like to matter. The rawness in her voice, the way she'd looked at him like he was a problem she was tired of solving. He thought about the library conversation. Tell me one thing about me that isn't written in the marriage contract. He still couldn't answer that question. 6 months married, and he knew nothing about his wife except that he'd broken something in her he didn't know how to fix. The bottle was half empty when Mrs. Penrose found him slumped in his study chair, staring at Leora's letter. Well, she said quietly, I didn't think I'd live to see this. See what? You, caring about something you can't control. Elias laughed. It came out bitter. I don't know how to care. Not the way she needs. Not the way anyone needs. Then learn. It's too late. Is it? Mrs. Penrose took the whiskey away, set it out of reach. She's not gone yet. She's coming back. What you do between now and then, that's what matters. What am I supposed to do? Figure out why you want her back. And make sure it's the right reason. What's the right reason? Not my job to tell you, but I'll give you a hint. If it's because the house feels empty without her, that's not enough. If it's because you can't stand losing something you thought you owned, that's worse. She paused at the door. Figure out if you want her, or if you just want to not feel like this. She left. Elias sat in the dark, head pounding, and tried to answer a question he didn't know how to ask. Did he love Leora? He didn't know. He'd never loved anyone. Didn't know what it felt like, what it looked like, how to recognize it. But he knew what missing her felt like, and that was a start. The 5th week, he made a decision. He started writing letters. Not to Leora. He didn't trust himself to say the right things yet. But to people who knew her, her sisters, her old governess, anyone who could tell him about the woman he'd married and never bothered to understand. The responses came slowly. Her older sister wrote about Leora's love of gardens, how she'd spent hours as a child trying to grow roses in poor soil, refusing to give up even when nothing bloomed. The governess mentioned her gift for languages, how she'd taught herself French and Italian from library books because she'd dreamed of traveling. A cousin talked about her kindness, the way she'd cared for their dying mother without complaint, how she'd sacrificed her own youth to duty. Each letter was a piece of a person he'd never seen. Leora wasn't quiet because she had nothing to say. She was quiet because no one had ever asked her to speak. She wasn't plain, she was understated, careful not to draw attention because attention had always meant criticism. She wasn't easy to forget. She'd made herself forgettable as survival. Elias sat surrounded by letters from strangers who knew his wife better than he did and felt something crack open in his chest. He'd married a woman who'd already been invisible her entire life. And instead of seeing her, He'd made her disappear. But December brought snow. Varrick Hall looked like something from a painting, white and pristine and beautiful in a way that made Elias feel colder. Christmas preparations happened around him. The staff decorated, Mrs. Penrose organized the annual tenant party, everything proceeded as it always had. Except Leora wasn't there. Her absence had become a presence. The empty chair at dinner, the silent piano, the library window seat where no one sat. The staff felt it too. He heard them sometimes, talking about Mrs. Varrick in lowered voices, wondering if she'd really come back, speculating about what had driven her away. They weren't cruel about it. They liked Leora. She'd been kind to them in ways Elias had never thought to be. One of the maids had cried when Leora left. Elias had seen her in the hallway, red-eyed and quiet, and hadn't understood why. Now he did. Leora had made herself matter to people, just not to him. On Christmas Eve, he stood in the drawing room where they used to have silent, miserable dinners. The tree was decorated. Fire burned in the hearth. Everything looked festive and warm. It felt like a tomb. He thought about Leora spending Christmas with her family, probably smiling more than she had in months, probably breathing easier away from him. The thought should have made him angry. Instead, it made him ache. He wanted her here, in this room, in this house. Not because it ran better with her, but because she belonged here in a way he'd refused to acknowledge. This was her home, too. He just never let her live in it. The fire crackled. Snow fell outside. Elias stood alone and made a promise to the empty room. When she came back, things would be different. He just had to figure out how. New Year's came and went. Elias received another letter. Leora would return January 15th, 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to figure out how to fix 6 months of damage. 3 weeks to become someone worth coming home to. He had no idea where to start, so he started with the house. He went into her bedroom and noticed the thin blankets. Ordered new ones, thick wool, properly warm. Had a fire laid in the grate every morning so the room wouldn't be cold. Brought in a better lamp for reading. He filled the drawing room with flowers. Not perfectly arranged, he didn't have her skill, but present, trying. He asked the cook about her favorite foods. Learned she liked berry tarts and hated mutton. Added it to the meal rotations. Small things. Inadequate things. But it was something. Mrs. Penrose watched him with an expression he couldn't read. "What?" he asked one morning, catching her staring. "Nothing. Just never thought I'd see the day Elias Varrick tried to please a woman." "I'm not trying to please her. I'm trying to—" He stopped. What was he trying to do? "You're trying to make her want to stay," Mrs. Penrose said quietly. "That's a start. But wanting her to stay and making her want to stay are different things." "I know that. Do you? Because preparation is easy. Following through is hard. You can stock her room with every comfort in England, but if you go back to ignoring her the moment she walks through that door, none of it matters." "I won't." "You say that now. But when work piles up and routine settles back in, what then? When she's right in front of you every day and it stops feeling urgent, what happens?" Elias had no answer. Mrs. Penrose softened. "I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm trying to make sure you understand what you're promising. Leora didn't leave because the house was uncomfortable. She left because you were." The words landed like a blow. "I know," Elias said quietly. "Then be better. Not for 3 weeks while she's gone. Forever. Or let her go." She walked away. Elias stood in the hallway, surrounded by preparations that felt increasingly hollow. He could make the house perfect, but if he couldn't make himself different, none of it would matter. January 15th arrived cold and clear. Elias was dressed by dawn. He'd rehearsed what he wanted to say 100 times. None of it sounded right. By noon, he was pacing the entrance hall. By 1, he'd given up on composure and was openly watching the drive. By 2, the carriage appeared. His heart did something complicated in his chest. The footman moved to open the door, but Elias stopped him. "I'll do it." He walked down the steps into winter sunlight. The carriage door opened. Leora stepped out. She looked different, healthier. Her cheeks had color. Her eyes were clear. She'd gained a little weight, enough to stop looking breakable. She looked like someone who'd remembered how to exist. Their eyes met. Elias saw wariness there, and something else. something that looked like resolution. "Welcome home," he said. Leora's expression didn't change. "Thank you." She moved past him toward the house. Elias stood frozen, watching her walk away from him again. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He'd prepared the house, prepared himself. He'd thought, what had he thought? That she'd come back grateful, forgiving? She'd come back because she'd said she would, not because she wanted to. Mrs. Penrose appeared at his elbow. "Well, are you going to stand here or go after her?" Elias looked at the house. Leora had already disappeared inside. "What do I say? The truth, whatever that is for you." He climbed the steps, entered his own house feeling like a stranger. Leora was in the entrance hall removing her coat. She moved efficiently, familiarly, like she'd never left, but everything about her posture said she had. "Leora," she paused, didn't turn around. "Yes? We need to talk." "Later. I'm tired." "Please." The word felt foreign in his mouth. He wasn't sure he'd ever said it to her before. Leora finally turned, looked at him with those dark eyes that had once dropped whenever he entered a room. Now they held his steadily, waiting. Elias stopped, started again. "I know I have no right to ask this, but give me a chance, one chance, to show you things can be different." "Different how?" "I don't know yet, but I want to figure it out." Leora studied him for a long moment. He felt exposed under that gaze, judged. Finally, she said, "Why?" "Why what? Why now? What changed?" It was a fair question. The answer felt too big, too complicated. "You left," he said simply, "and I realized the house wasn't empty because you were gone. It was empty because I'd never let you fill it. I'd never let you matter." Something flickered in her expression. Not hope. Something more complicated. "And now you want me to matter?" "Yes." "Because it's convenient? Because the house runs better with me in it?" "No, because—" He struggled for words that wouldn't sound rehearsed. "Because I can't stop thinking about you standing on those cliffs, alone, trying to feel something other than what I made you feel. Because every room in this house reminded me you'd been there and I'd never noticed. Because I married you and didn't learn a single thing about who you actually are. And that's—" His voice cracked. Leora waited. "That's unforgivable," he finished quietly. "And I know I can't undo it, but I want to try, if you'll let me." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Leora picked up her coat. "I'm going to my room. We'll talk at dinner." She walked away. Elias stood in the entrance hall, heart pounding, and realized he'd just done something he'd never done before. He'd asked, and she hadn't said yes. Dinner was a disaster. Not because of shouting or drama. That would have been easier. Instead, it was the careful politeness that made Elias want to put his fist through the wall. Leora sat across from him like a dinner guest, answering questions with pleasant nothingness while the silence between words grew teeth. "How was your journey back?" he asked. "Fine. The roads were clear." "And your family?" "Well, my sister sends her regards." "Did you—" He stopped, regrouped. "Did you enjoy yourself?" Leora set down her fork with precision. "Is there a point to this interrogation, or are we just filling silence?" "I'm trying to have a conversation." "No, you're performing one. There's a difference." The servant circulated with wine, pretending deafness. Elias waited until they retreated before leaning forward. "Then tell me what you want. Tell me how to do this right." "I don't know if you can." The honesty of it cut clean. "You won't even let me try?" "I let you try for 6 months. You didn't notice." "I'm noticing now." "Because I left. Because it became inconvenient." "That's not the same as actually caring, Elias." She picked up her wine, took a sip. Her hand was steady. "You want credit for noticing my absence. I want someone who notices my presence. I'm here, right now, noticing. For how long? A week? A month? Until the next estate crisis pulls your attention and I'm background noise again?" She shook her head. "I don't have the energy to hope anymore. Hoping broke me the first time." Elias felt something desperate claw at his chest. "What do you want from me? Just tell me. I'll do it." Leora looked at him for a long moment. Something sad moved across her face. "That's the problem. You shouldn't have to be told. You should just know, or want to know, or care enough to figure it out. She stood. I'm tired. Excuse me. Leora? Good night, Elias. She left him sitting at the table, surrounded by half-eaten food and the wreckage of his first attempt. He'd thought preparing the house would matter, thought wanting to change would be enough. He'd been wrong. But the next morning he woke to find her already gone from the house. Mrs. Varrick went walking, the maid informed him nervously. Said she needed air. Elias looked out the window at the January freeze. In this weather? She took a coat, sir. Of course she did. Leora had spent 6 months walking in storms. Why would a little cold stop her now? He found her on the cliffs an hour later. She was standing at the edge where the path crumbled into nothing, wind whipping her coat around her legs. She didn't turn when he approached, but her shoulders tensed. You're going to catch pneumonia, he said. You said that before. I'm still here. Elias stopped a few feet back, giving her space. Can we talk? We talked at dinner. No. You told me I was failing. I need you to tell me how not to fail. Leora turned then, and her expression was exhausted. I can't teach you how to care about me, Elias. That's not something I can script for you. I do care. About what? Losing me, or actually having me? The distinction felt like a trap. Both. That's not an answer. Then what is? She looked back at the ocean. Waves crashed against rocks that had stood there for thousands of years, indifferent to violence. When I was 17, my mother got sick. Took her 3 months to die. Every day I'd sit with her, and every day she'd ask if my father had come to visit yet. He never did. Too busy, he'd say. Important meetings, pressing business. Her voice was flat. He couldn't face the fact that something he loved was slipping away, so he just stopped looking, made it easier. I'm not your father. No, but you're doing the same thing. You couldn't deal with a wife who needed things, so you stopped looking, made me invisible. Easier that way. She turned to face him fully. The difference is, I'm not dying. I'm just done waiting for you to show up. I'm here now. You're here because I left. That's not the same thing. Elias felt frustration rise, hot and immediate. What do you want? A time machine? I can't undo the past 6 months. I want you to understand why I left. Not just feel bad that I did. Her eyes were steady, unforgiving. You keep saying you want to try, but you haven't asked me a single question about myself. You haven't asked what I did while I was gone, what I thought about, whether I'm happy to be back. You're just performing concern and hoping that's enough. The accusation landed because it was true. Elias opened his mouth, closed it. Are you happy to be back? No. The word hung between them like a stone. Then why did you come back? Because I gave my word. Because running away permanently makes me like my father, and I refuse to be that. She pulled her coat tighter. But being here doesn't mean I'm staying. Not really. I'm just existing until I figure out what comes next. What comes next? Something cold spread through his chest. You're planning to leave again. I don't know what I'm planning. That's the point. For the first time in my life, I'm not planning anything. I'm just waiting to see what I can tolerate. And what if I become someone you don't have to tolerate? What if I actually change? Leora's smile was broken. Then that would be a nice surprise. But I'm not holding my breath. She walked past him, back toward the house. Elias stood on the cliff edge, wind tearing at his coat, and felt the ground shift beneath him. She wasn't fighting him. That would have been easier. She'd just stopped caring enough to fight. The following days were worse than her absence had been. Leora was there, physically present, going through motions. But she'd pulled so far into herself that she might as well have been a ghost. She managed the household, attended meals, responded when spoken to. But there was nothing behind it. No warmth, no anger, just polite, crushing indifference. Elias tried everything he could think of. He asked about her day. She said it was fine. He brought her flowers. She thanked him and put them in water without comment. He suggested they take a carriage ride together. She agreed, then sat in silence for an hour while he struggled to fill the space with conversation that went nowhere. Every attempt slid off her like rain off glass. Mrs. Penrose watched it happen with grim satisfaction. You're trying too hard, she told him one afternoon. How can I try too hard to save my marriage? Because you're trying to fix this like it's an estate problem. Do A, B, and C get result D? But she's not a problem to solve. She's a person you hurt. I know that. Do you? Because you're still treating her like a project. If I perform enough caring gestures, she'll forgive me. That's not how this works. Elias slumped in his chair. Then tell me how it works. You have to mean it. Actually want to know her, not just want her to stay. And you have to accept that even if you do everything right, she might still leave. Because that's her choice, not yours. That's unacceptable. Too bad. Some things you don't get to control. She left him stewing in impotent frustration. That night he couldn't sleep. He paced his room, then the hallway, then found himself standing outside Leora's door again. Light showed under the gap. She was awake. He knocked before he could talk himself out of it. Come in. She was sitting at her desk, writing letters. She didn't look up when he entered. Can't sleep? She asked. No? Neither can I. Funny, that. Elias closed the door behind him. The room was warmer than it used to be. The new blankets were on the bed, the fire burning low in the grate. She'd noticed his changes, just didn't comment on them. What are you writing? Letters to my sister. About what? None of your business. The dismissal stung. Leora. What do you want, Elias? It's past midnight. I'm tired. If you have something to say, say it. Otherwise, leave me alone. The edge in her voice was new, sharper than before. She'd come back from her family with more spine, and he didn't know what to do with it. I want to understand, he said quietly. Understand what? How to fix this. How to make you trust me again. Leora set down her pen, turned to face him. You can't. Trust isn't something you rebuild in 2 weeks. I spent 6 months learning you were exactly who you appeared to be. Cold, distant, uninterested. You're asking me to unlearn that because you suddenly feel bad about it. That's not how people work. People change. Do they? Or do they just get better at hiding who they are? She stood, arms crossed. You want me to believe you're different now, but I've seen nothing different except effort, and effort isn't the same as actual change. What would actual change look like? I don't know. That's what you're supposed to figure out. But you keep asking me to give you instructions, like I'm some puzzle to solve. I'm not a puzzle. I'm a person who's been ignored and dismissed and made to feel worthless for half a year. You don't fix that by following a checklist. Her voice cracked on the last word. Elias took a step closer. I never meant to make you feel worthless. And yet, she laughed bitterly. Intention doesn't erase impact. You made me feel like I could disappear and you wouldn't notice until the house stopped running smoothly. That's not something a few flowers and awkward conversations can fix. Then what can? Time, consistency, proof that this isn't just panic because you lost control of something. She met his eyes. And honestly, I'm not sure I care enough to wait and find out. The words hit like a fist. You don't mean that, don't I? I spent 6 months caring and getting nothing back. Now you want me to care again because you've decided it's convenient. Why should I? Because we're married. That's a legal state, not an emotional one. We signed papers. We don't have a marriage. We have an arrangement that's failing. Elias felt something desperate rise in his throat. I don't want it to fail. Then you should have thought about that 6 months ago, or 5 months ago, or any of the dozens of times I tried to reach you and you shut me down. Her expression was hard. You don't get to care now just because I stopped. That's not fair. Neither was what you did to me, but here we are. They stared at each other across 3 feet of carpet that felt like a canyon. Finally, Elias said, I'm sorry. For what? For all of it. For not seeing you. For not trying. For making you feel like you didn't matter. Okay. Just that. No forgiveness, no softening, just acknowledgement. Okay, he repeated. You apologized. I heard it. What else do you want? I want you to believe it. I don't. But maybe someday I will, if you prove it. She sat back down at her desk, dismissal clear. Good night, Elias. He left because there was nothing else to do. Back in his room, he put his fist through the wall. The pain was sharp and immediate, and infinitely preferable to the hollowness in his chest. 3 days later, everything came to a head. The vicar's wife was hosting a dinner party, one of those mandatory social obligations that Elias hated and Lyora had always handled with grace. He'd assumed they'd attend together, present the united front expected of them. He found Lyora in the drawing room reading. "We need to leave in an hour," he said. She didn't look up. "For what?" "The Ashfords' dinner party." "I'm not going." Elias stopped. "What?" "I'm not going. You can make an excuse for me. This is a social obligation. For you, not for me. You're my wife. People expect to see us together." Now she looked up and her expression was flat. "Then they'll be disappointed. I'm not performing the happy marriage anymore, Elias. If you want to go, go. But I'm staying here." "That's unacceptable." "Too bad." Anger flared, hot and familiar. "You can't just refuse to fulfill your duties." "Watch me." "Lyora." "No." She stood, book forgotten. "I've done everything you've asked for 6 months. Smiled at the right people, said the right things, pretended we were something we're not. I'm done. You want to keep up appearances? Do it yourself. This will cause talk. Let it. Maybe the truth needs to come out." "The truth?" He stepped closer, voice low and dangerous. "What truth is that? That my wife is selfish and stubborn?" Something flashed in her eyes. "That your marriage is a lie. That you don't care about me, and I've stopped pretending otherwise. That would be a refreshing change from the fiction we've been selling. You're being childish, and you're being controlling, same as always." They stood toe to toe now, both breathing hard. "I have been trying," Elias bit out. "For 2 weeks I've done nothing but try. And you've given me nothing, no credit, no acknowledgement, nothing. You want credit for 2 weeks of effort after 6 months of neglect? You want me to applaud you for basic decency?" Lyora's voice rose. "I gave you 6 months, Elias. 6 months of hoping and trying and getting nothing back. You can survive 2 weeks of the same." "That's cruel. That's fair. This isn't about fairness. This is about you punishing me." "No, this is about me protecting myself. There's a difference." Elias felt his control fracturing. "By refusing to even try? By shutting me out? You shut me out first. You set the precedent. I'm just following your lead. I'm trying to fix that. By demanding I attend social functions? By getting angry when I don't perform on command? That's not fixing anything. That's just you being frustrated I'm not cooperating with your redemption arc." The accusation landed because it was partially true. Elias took a breath, forced himself to step back. "Fine. Don't go. I'll make an excuse." "Thank you." The politeness was worse than anger. He went to the door, stopped, turned back. "When does this end?" "When does what end?" "This, the punishment, the ice. When do I get a chance to actually fix things?" Lyora looked at him with something that might have been pity. "You don't understand yet. This isn't punishment. This is me surviving you. When that changes, if it changes, you'll know." "How?" "Because I'll tell you. Until then, stop asking." He left. Attended the dinner party alone, endured the pitying looks and careful questions about his wife's health, smiled and lied and hated every second of it. When he got home, Lyora's bedroom door was closed. He stood outside it for 5 minutes, hand raised to knock, before walking away. The breaking point came 4 days later. Elias was in his study when Mrs. Penrose knocked. "Mrs. Varrick is leaving." He looked up from paperwork he wasn't actually reading. "Leaving where?" "The house. Her bags are packed. She's waiting for the carriage." Everything went cold. "What?" "She's leaving, boy. For good. Unless you do something." He was moving before he finished processing the words. Down the stairs, through the hall, to the entrance where Lyora stood in her traveling coat, bags at her feet. She looked calm, resolved. "What are you doing?" His voice came out rough. "Leaving." "You can't." "I can. I'm choosing to." "We had an agreement. You said you'd come back." "I did come back. I gave you 2 weeks. It didn't work." She pulled on her gloves. "I'm going to stay with my sister until I figure out what's next." "What's next? What does that mean?" "I don't know yet. Maybe an annulment? Maybe just living separately. I haven't decided. The words hit like bullets. You can't just leave. Watch me. Leora, please. No. Her voice was firm. I can't do this anymore, Elias. I can't live in this house pretending we have a marriage when we don't. I can't keep hoping you'll become someone you're not. I can't break myself again for someone who doesn't see me. I see you now. You see what you're losing. That's not the same thing. She picked up her smaller bag. I'll write once I'm settled. We can discuss arrangements then. The carriage appeared in the drive. Elias felt panic rise, sharp and unfamiliar. Don't do this. I have to. Why? Because staying is killing me, slowly, and I'd rather be alone and alive than married and drowning. The footman moved to collect her bags. Elias grabbed her wrist, not hard, but enough to stop her. Please. One more chance. Just one. Leora looked at his hand on her wrist, then at his face. Something in her expression shifted. Let go. Not until you hear me. I've heard enough. No, you haven't. He released her wrist but didn't step back. You're right. About all of it. I did shut you out. I did make you invisible. I treated you like furniture and wondered why you weren't happy. I was cruel without meaning to be, which somehow makes it worse. Elias, I'm not done. His voice cracked. You asked what I want. I want you. Not the house running smoothly, not the appearance of marriage. You. And I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I've wasted every chance you've already given me, but I'm asking anyway, because losing you is... He stopped, throat tight. I can't. You already lost me, months ago. You just didn't notice. Then let me find you again. I'm not hiding. I've been right here the whole time. I know, and I'm sorry I didn't see it. He was begging now, pride forgotten. But I see it now. And if you leave, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Not because the house will be empty, but because you won't be in it. Leora's eyes were wet. That's not enough. I know, but it's true. They stood in the entrance hall while the footman waited awkwardly by the door and the carriage horses stamped in the cold. I don't believe you, Leora whispered. I know. You'll go back to who you were. Maybe, probably, but I'll try not to every day. I'll try. Trying isn't enough. It's all I have. She looked at him for a long, terrible moment. Then she picked up her bag. Elias felt his heart stop. Leora, I need time. Away from this house, away from you, to think. How much time? I don't know. A week. Maybe more. She moved toward the door. Don't follow me. Don't write. Don't send messages. Just let me be alone. And when I'm ready, I'll come back. Or I won't. And I'm supposed to just wait? Yes. That's torture. Welcome to the last 6 months of my life. She walked out, got into the carriage. Elias stood in the doorway and watched her leave for the second time. This time felt final. The carriage disappeared into gray morning, and he stood there until Mrs. Penrose pulled him inside. Well, she said quietly, now you know. Know what? What it feels like to be her. Elias looked at the empty drive, the cold house, the life he'd built that felt like a prison without her in it. For the first time, he understood what he'd done. And it might be too late to fix it. The house felt like a morgue after she left. Elias stood in the entrance hall long after the carriage disappeared, staring at nothing. Mrs. Penrose had gone. The servants had scattered. He was alone with the silence and the understanding that he'd finally pushed her past the point of return. He went to his study, sat at his desk, stared at paperwork that meant nothing. An hour passed. Maybe 2. Then he stood up, walked to Leora's room, and started reading. Not her letters. He wasn't that far gone. But the books she'd left behind. The ones with pressed flowers marking pages. The ones with notes in the margins in her small, careful handwriting. He read the Keats poem she'd marked. Then the Tennyson. Then a passage from something philosophical he didn't understand but she'd underlined twice. He was looking for her in the only place he knew how. By midnight, he'd filled 3 pages with notes. Things she'd liked. Passages she'd marked. Patterns in what drew her attention. It wasn't much. It was pathetic, actually. A husband learning about his wife from the books she'd left behind instead of the conversations they'd never had. But it was something. The next morning, he did something he'd never done in his life. He canceled his appointments. All of them. The estate could wait. The tenants could wait. Everything could wait. He sat down and wrote Leora a letter. Not the letter she'd told him not to write. This one wouldn't be sent. This was for him. An accounting of everything he'd done wrong, everything he understood now, everything he wanted to say but didn't know how. It took him 6 hours. When he finished, his hand was cramping and the pages were covered in crossed-out words and failed attempts at honesty. He read it over once, then burned it in the fireplace. She didn't need his excuses. She needed his actions. He just had to figure out what those actions should be. Mrs. Penrose found him in the library the next day, surrounded by more of Leora's books. "You look terrible." "Thank you." "Have you eaten?" "No." She set down a tray with food he wouldn't touch. "What are you doing?" "Research." "On what?" "My wife." Mrs. Penrose was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down across from him, which she never did. "Talk to me." "About what?" "What you're actually feeling, not what you think you should be feeling, the truth." Elias set down the book he'd been pretending to read, looked at the woman who'd raised him after his mother died, who'd never let him get away with anything, who was possibly the only person in the world who gave a damn whether he lived or died. "I'm terrified," he said quietly. "Of what?" "That she won't come back. That she will come back and I'll ruin it again. That I'm fundamentally incapable of being what she needs." He laughed bitterly. "Take your pick." "Those are all possibilities. That's not helpful." "You want helpful? Here it is. Stop trying to figure out how to make her love you and start figuring out if you actually love her." The question hit like a slap. "What? You've spent 2 weeks performing concern, acting like a husband who cares, but I've watched you your whole life, boy, and I've never seen you love anything that wasn't this estate." She leaned forward. "So before you keep torturing yourself over Leora, answer one question. Do you love her? Actually love her? Or do you just hate losing?" Elias opened his mouth, closed it. "I don't know," he admitted. "Then that's where you start. Because if you don't know, she's right to leave. And if you do know, you need to figure out how to prove it. Words won't do it. Grand gestures won't do it. You need to become someone worth coming home to." "I don't know how to do that." "Then learn. Or let her go." Mrs. Penrose stood. "But decide. Because this middle ground where you're miserable and she's miserable, that's not sustainable for either of you." She left him sitting in the library with a question he didn't know how to answer. 3 days passed with no word. Elias didn't write, didn't send messages, honored her request for space even though it was killing him. Instead, he did something he'd never done before. He asked the staff about Leora. Started with the housekeeper. "Was Mrs. Varrick happy here?" The woman looked startled. "Sir?" "Before she left, was she happy?" A pause. Then, carefully, "I don't think that's my place to say." "I'm asking you to say it." Another pause. "No, sir. She wasn't happy. But she tried to be. For a long time, she tried." The cook said Leora used to come down to the kitchen late at night when she couldn't sleep, would sit at the work table and talk about nothing, just needing company. The gardener mentioned she'd spent hours trying to grow roses in the south garden, even though the soil was wrong. She'd failed, but kept trying anyway. The maid admitted Leora had cried. Not often, but sometimes, late at night, when she thought no one could hear. Each conversation was a small blade to the chest. By the end of the week, Elias had a portrait of his wife built from other people's observations. She was kind, lonely, tried too hard to be invisible, loved gardens and books and needed people, but was afraid to ask for them. He'd lived with her for 6 months and learned none of this. Other people had seen her in ways he'd refused to. The understanding sat in his chest like a stone. On the 8th day, he received a letter, not from Leora, from her sister. It was brief, polite, and devastating. "Mr. Varrick, I thought you should know that Leora arrived here in a state I have not seen since our mother's death. She will not speak of what happened, but I can guess. I am writing to tell you that if you contact her before she is ready, I will ensure you never see her again. She needs time to heal from whatever you did to her. If you care for her at all, and I am not convinced you do, you will respect her wishes and leave her alone. Regards, Catherine Hale." Elias read it 3 times. The accusation was clear, the threat clearer. He'd broken Leora badly enough that her family was circling wagons. He sat at his desk and wrote a response. Mrs. Hale, you're right. About all of it. I don't deserve your sister, and I'm not convinced I'm capable of being what she needs. But I'm trying to figure it out. Not for my sake, though I'm selfish enough to want her back, but because she deserves better than what I gave her. I won't contact her. I won't pressure her. But when she's ready to come back, if she's ready, I'll be here. And I'll be different. Or I'll fail trying. Tell her that. If you think it will help, or don't tell her anything. Whatever protects her more. E. Varrick. He sent it before he could second-guess himself. 2 days later, he got a response. She read your letter. She didn't say anything, but she didn't throw it away either. That's all I can give you. It wasn't much, but it was something. The second week was harder than the first. The house felt wrong. Too big, too empty. He couldn't focus on work. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop thinking about Leora sitting in her sister's house, trying to piece herself back together from the damage he'd done. He started making changes, small ones at first. He had the roses Leora had tried to grow dug up and replaced with soil from a different part of the estate, hired a proper gardener to teach him what she'd been trying to do. He went through the library and read every book she'd marked, made notes, tried to understand what drew her to certain passages. He learned she liked poetry about longing, philosophy about meaning, stories where women saved themselves instead of waiting to be saved. The pattern felt like an indictment. One night, he found himself in the music room where she'd fumbled through piano pieces. He sat at the bench, pressed a few keys. The sound was discordant, lonely. He hired a piano teacher the next day. Mrs. Penrose watched all of this with an expression he couldn't read. What? He asked one morning, catching her staring. You're actually trying. That was the plan. No, I mean really trying, not performing, actually changing. She looked almost proud. I didn't think you had it in you. Neither did I. Good. Keep going. You're not done yet. On day 15, something shifted. Elias was working in the rose garden, actually working, hands in dirt, learning from the gardener about soil composition. When a carriage appeared in the drive, his heart stopped. But it wasn't Leora. It was Catherine Hale, Leora's sister. She stepped out of the carriage like she owned the place, all sharp eyes and sharper judgment. She was older than Leora by several years, and she looked at Elias like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Mrs. Hale. He stood, brushed dirt from his hands. I wasn't expecting you. I'm sure you weren't. Is there somewhere we can talk? Of course, the drawing room. Here is fine. They stood in the garden. Elias felt distinctly at a disadvantage, covered in dirt while she looked impeccable. How is she? He asked. Surviving. No thanks to you. I know. Do you? Catherine's voice was sharp. Because I'm not convinced you understand what you did. Leora doesn't break easily. Our childhood saw to that, but you managed it in 6 months. I'm aware. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you're playing in a garden and hoping that fixes years of neglect. Not years. 6 months. You think it started when you married her? Catherine laughed bitterly. You're just the latest in a long line of people who made Leora feel worthless. The difference is, she chose you. She hoped you'd be different, and you proved her wrong. The words were designed to hurt. They succeeded. Why are you here? Elias asked quietly. To see if you're serious. If this is real or just panic because you lost control of something. It's real. Prove it. How? Catherine studied him for a long moment. Leora told me what you said, before she left, that you wanted her, not the appearance of marriage. Do you remember that? Yes. Did you mean it? Yes. Then answer this. What do you actually know about my sister? Not what you've learned in the last 2 weeks. What did you know before she left? Elias felt his jaw tighten. Not enough. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have. I knew she was quiet, competent, good at running the house. I knew she read. I knew she walked on the cliffs. He stopped. That's all. Everything else I've learned from other people or from books she left behind. That's pathetic. I know. And you think you love her? The question was a trap. I don't know if I love her. I know I can't stop thinking about her. I know the house feels wrong without her. I know I'd give anything to have her back. If that's love, then yes. If it's not, I don't know what else to call it." Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you know her favorite color?" "No." "Her favorite season?" "No." "What she wanted to be when she was a child?" "No." "And yet you claim to want her back." "I want to learn those things. I want to know her, actually know her." His voice cracked. "I know I don't deserve the chance, but I'm asking for it anyway." Catherine looked at him like she was weighing something. Finally, she said, "Her favorite color is green, the kind you see in spring leaves, not forest dark. Her favorite season is autumn because it's honest about endings. When she was a child, she wanted to be a teacher because she liked the idea of making people feel seen." Elias felt something crack in his chest. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because if you're serious about knowing her, you should start with the basics. And because—" She stopped, seemed to struggle with something. "Because she asked me to check on you." "What?" "She didn't say it directly, just asked if I'd heard anything about how you were managing, if the house was all right, if you'd hired someone to replace her yet." Catherine's expression softened slightly. "She still cares. Despite everything, she still cares. And I'm here to decide if you're worth it." "And?" "I haven't decided yet, but you're trying. I'll give you that much." She turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing. If she comes back and you hurt her again, I will make your life hell. Clear?" "Clear." "Good." She got back in the carriage and left. Elias stood in the garden, covered in dirt, with 3 new pieces of information about his wife. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That night, he couldn't sleep again. He went to Lior's room, sat at her desk, stared at the stack of books. Green, autumn, teaching. He thought about the woman who'd tried to grow roses in bad soil, who'd read poetry about longing, who'd sat in this cold room and taught herself to stop hoping. She'd wanted to make people feel seen, and he'd made her invisible. The irony was brutal. He opened the desk drawer, not to snoop, just to see. Inside was a journal, leather-bound, unmarked. He shouldn't read it. He knew he shouldn't. He opened it anyway. The entries were sparse, not daily, but occasional. Moments when she'd needed to put thoughts somewhere. October 12th. He didn't come to dinner tonight. I waited an hour before eating alone. I'm not sure why I still wait. November 3rd. Mrs. Penrose asked if I was happy. I lied. I've gotten good at lying. December 18th. Sometimes I think about just walking into the ocean. Not to die, exactly. Just to feel something other than this. Elias slammed the journal shut, stomach turning. She'd been that close to breaking, and he'd never noticed. He put the journal back, closed the drawer, left the room. Went back to his study and wrote another letter he'd never send. This one was shorter. "I'm sorry I made you feel like drowning. I'm sorry I didn't see you were sinking. I'm sorry for all of it. And I know sorry isn't enough, but it's all I have right now." He burned it in the fireplace and watched the words turn to ash. Day 18 brought unexpected visitors. The vicar and his wife appeared at the door, ostensibly for tea but clearly on a mission. "We heard about Mrs. Varrick's absence," Mrs. Ashford said carefully. "We wanted to check that everything was all right." Translation: The gossip had spread and they wanted confirmation. Elias considered lying, then decided against it. "Mrs. Varrick is visiting family. She needed space." "Space from what?" "From me." The honesty clearly surprised them. Mrs. Ashford's teacup rattled slightly. "I see," she said. "Do you? Because I'm not sure I did. For a long time." Elias set down his own cup. "I married your daughter's friend and treated her like furniture. She left because I gave her no reason to stay. That's the truth. If you want to gossip about it, at least get the story right." The vicar cleared his throat. "Mr. Varrick, I'm not interested in sympathy or advice. I just wanted to be honest for once. My marriage failed because I failed, and I'm trying to fix it, but I might be too late. That's all there is to say." They left shortly after, clearly uncomfortable. Mrs. Penrose found him in the hall afterward. "That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. The whole county will know by tomorrow." "Good. Let them know. I'm tired of pretending." She smiled. Actually smiled. "You're learning." Yiki. That's
Day 21 was when everything changed. Elias was in the garden again. The roses were actually starting to grow now, under proper care, when he heard footsteps on the gravel path. He looked up. Leora stood 10 feet away. She looked different, healthier, like before, but also wary, guarded. They stared at each other. "You came back," he said stupidly. "I said I would, when I was ready."
Are you? Ready?
"I don't know. That's why I'm here, to find out."
Elias stood slowly, conscious of the dirt on his hands, his clothes. You look well. So do you. Different. I've been trying. I heard. She stepped closer. Catherine told me about your conversation, and Mrs. Ashford wrote to my sister about what you said to the vicar. Apparently you've caused quite a scandal. I told the truth. Seemed like a good place to start. Something shifted in her expression, not quite softening, but close. You're working in the garden. Learning to. The roses you tried to grow, I had them replanted. Properly this time. I thought... He trailed off. You thought what? That if I could help them grow, maybe I could figure out how to help us grow. It's stupid. I know it's stupid. It's not stupid. Leora moved closer to the rose bushes, touched a leaf gently. These are doing better than mine ever did. I had help, and better soil, and someone who actually knew what they were doing. Sounds familiar? The comment hung between them. I'm sorry, Elias said quietly, for all of it, for not seeing you, for making you feel worthless, for being exactly what you feared I'd be. I know. Catherine told me you said as much in your letter. I meant it. I know that too. She turned to face him. But meaning it and changing because of it are different things. I'm changing, or trying to. I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I'm trying. Why? Because losing you was the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And I want you back. Not the version of you who stayed quiet and invisible. The real you. The one who tried to grow roses and read poetry and needed more than I gave. Leora's eyes were wet. That's a nice speech. It's not a speech, it's the truth. Truth is cheap, Elias. Actions matter more. Then judge me on my actions. Stay. For a week. A month. However long you need. And if I fall back into old patterns, if I stop trying, if I make you feel invisible again, leave. For good. I won't stop you. You couldn't stop me anyway. I know, but I'm asking you to stay anyway. She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her weighing it, calculating risks, trying to decide if hope was worth the danger. Finally, she said, 1 month. That's all I'm promising. And we do this differently. No more silent dinners, no more separate lives under one roof. If this is going to work, we actually have to try. Both of us. Agreed. I mean it, Elias. If you go back to treating me like I'm invisible, I'm gone, and I won't come back again. I understand. Do you? Yes. He stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes that he'd never noticed before. I'm terrified I'll fail. But I'd rather fail trying than succeed at pretending. Something in her expression cracked, just slightly, just enough. All right, she said softly. 1 month. 1 month. They stood in the garden surrounded by roses that were finally growing, and for the first time since she'd left, Elias felt something that might have been hope. The first 3 days were excruciating, not because of fighting, that would have been familiar territory. Instead, they circled each other like strangers learning a new language. Every interaction waited with the awareness that this was the last chance either of them would get. Leora unpacked slowly, methodically, keeping most of her belongings in the trunk like she might need to leave at any moment. Elias noticed but didn't comment. He'd learned that much at least. Not everything needed to be said aloud. Breakfast on the first morning was stilted. Did you sleep well? He asked. Well enough, you? Not really. Why not? The question was simple. The answer wasn't. I kept waiting for you to change your mind, leave in the middle of the night. Leora set down her tea. I gave you a month. I keep my promises. I know. But knowing and believing are different things. She studied him across the table. You're going to have to get comfortable with uncertainty. I can't spend the next month reassuring you I'm still here. I'm not asking you to. Aren't you? He was. The realization sat heavy in his chest. You're right. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing for every small thing. It makes you sound like you're performing contrition. Then what should I do? Just be honest. If you're anxious, say so. If you're uncertain, admit it. But don't fish for reassurance. I can't carry both of us. It was harsh. It was also fair. Understood, he said. They finished breakfast in silence, but it felt different than before. Less empty, more like two people learning to coexist in the space between hope and caution. The first real test came that afternoon. Elias had a meeting with the estate manager, routine business that couldn't wait. In the past, he would have disappeared into his study for hours and forgotten Leora existed. Now he stood at the threshold of his old patterns, feeling their pull. It would be so easy to slip back, to prioritize work over presence, to let the estate swallow him whole. He found Leora in the library reading. I have a meeting in an hour, he said. She looked up. All right. It'll take 2 hours, maybe 3. I understand. You have work. I wanted you to know so you wouldn't think I was avoiding you. Something shifted in her expression. Thank you for telling me. Would you... He stopped, felt awkward. Would you want to sit in? It's just estate business, boring, but you're welcome. Leora's surprise was visible. You want me in your meeting? I want you to know what I'm doing, so there's no mystery, no wondering. He shrugged. Or don't, whatever you prefer. I just thought I'd offer. She considered it. I'll come, if you don't mind. I wouldn't have asked if I minded, so she came. Sat quietly in the corner while Elias discussed crop rotations and drainage with the estate manager. She didn't participate, but she was present, and Elias found himself explaining things to her afterward, making sure she understood the decisions being made. It was such a small thing. It mattered enormously. That night at dinner, Leora said, "Thank you for including me today. I should have done it months ago." Yes, but you didn't. And now you did. That's the point. Elias set down his fork. Can I ask you something? Yes? What made you come back, really? Leora was quiet for a moment. Honestly, curiosity. I wanted to see if you meant what you said, if you'd actually changed or if it was just panic. She met his eyes. I'm still not sure which it is. What would convince you? Time, consistency, proof that this isn't just temporary effort. How much time? I don't know. That's what this month is for. Fair enough. He could live with that. They finished dinner. Elias didn't retreat to his study. Instead, he asked if she wanted to walk. It was cold, nearly dark, but she agreed. They walked through the gardens in silence, their breath visible in the February air. At one point, their hands brushed. Elias thought about taking hers, then decided against it. Too much, too soon. But she noticed. He saw her glance at their hands, saw something uncertain cross her face. Maybe she'd thought about it too. Day 5 brought their first real argument. Elias had invited the vicar and his wife to dinner without consulting Leora first. She found out from Mrs. Penrose while planning the week's menus. She cornered him in his study. You invited guests without telling me? He looked up from correspondence. Yes. Was I supposed to ask permission? You were supposed to tell me. This is my house too, Elias. I'm the one managing the household. I can't do that if you're making decisions behind my back. He felt irritation rise. It's a simple dinner. I didn't think it required consultation. That's exactly the problem. You didn't think. You just decided. Her voice was sharp. This is what you did before. Made unilateral choices and expected me to execute them without question. That's not what I'm doing, isn't it? They stared at each other. Elias felt the old defensiveness rising, the urge to shut down, to assert his authority, to end the conversation, but he'd promised to be different. You're right, he said instead. Leora blinked. What? You're right. I should have told you. Should have asked if it was convenient. I didn't think, and that's not fair to you. He set down his pen. I'll write and postpone. You don't have to. Yes, I do, because this is supposed to be different, and if I start cutting corners on small things,
I'll cut them on big things too. He stood. I'm sorry. It won't happen again.
Leora looked stunned. That was unexpected. Good or bad? Good. Surprising, but good. I'm trying to surprise you less and listen more. That's working so far. She left. Elias sat back down and realized his hands were shaking. Admitting he was wrong felt like swallowing glass. But the alternative, losing her again, was worse. He'd take the glass. The second week was easier. They fell into a rhythm, not comfortable exactly, but functional. Breakfast together. Elias worked but came to find Leora every few hours. Lunch together. Afternoon walks when weather permitted. Dinner, followed by time in the drawing room where she read and he pretended to work, but mostly just watched her. They talked more. Not about heavy things. Those felt too risky. But small things. Books she was reading, changes she'd like to make to the garden, his frustration with a difficult tenant. One evening she asked about his childhood. What do you want to know? Anything. Everything. I know nothing about you. So he told her. About his mother dying when he was 8. His father's cold distance after. Growing up in this house with no warmth, learning that emotions were weaknesses and control was survival. That sounds lonely, Leora said quietly. It was, but I thought that's just how things were. And now? Now I know better, but knowing and changing are different things. She smiled slightly. You're learning that lesson over and over. Slowly, but yes. Later that night, they were walking back from the village when it started raining. Not heavy, just enough to be annoying. They hurried back, reaching the house breathless and damp. Leora laughed. It was the first time Elias had heard her laugh since she'd returned. The sound was light, surprised, genuine. He stared at her. What? She asked. Nothing. You laughed. I'm aware. I like it. Your laugh. She looked away, but he saw color rise in her cheeks. It's just a laugh. It's the first one I've heard in weeks. I'll take it. Something passed between them in that moment. Something fragile but real. Progress. Finally. The third week brought a crisis. One of the tenants, an older man who'd worked the land for 40 years, was being evicted by Elias's estate manager for unpaid rents. It was standard procedure. The man couldn't pay, couldn't work, had no family to help. Elias found out when Leora came to his study, furious. You're evicting Thomas Garrett? Who? The tenant in the East Cottage. He's 70 years old, Elias. Where's he supposed to go? That's not my concern. He can't pay his rent. He can't pay his rent because he's sick, because he's old, because he gave this estate 40 years of his life. Her voice shook. And you're throwing him out. It's business. If I make exceptions, then make exceptions. This is a person, not a ledger entry. Elias felt his jaw tighten. You don't understand how estates work. I understand how people work, and what you're doing is cruel. It's practical. It's the same thing you did to me. Treating someone like they're disposable when they stop being useful. The comparison hit like a fist. That's not... It is exactly the same. You're doing to him what you did to me. And if you can't see that, then nothing has changed at all. She left. Elias sat in his study, shaking with anger and something that felt uncomfortably like shame. She was wrong. This was different. Thomas Garrett was a tenant, not his wife. Business decisions couldn't be made on sentiment. Except she wasn't wrong about the pattern. He'd treated people like functions, valuable when useful, disposable when not. He'd done it to tenants, to staff, to Leora. He'd built an entire life on the principle that people were replaceable, and it had nearly cost him everything. That night, he went to the East Cottage. Thomas Garrett answered the door, hunched and wary. Mr. Varrick, I wasn't expecting you. May I come in? The cottage was small, cold, meticulously clean despite its poverty. Thomas offered tea. Elias accepted, feeling like an intruder. I understand you're having trouble with rent, Elias said. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, sir. I've been trying, but the work's too hard now, and how long have you worked this estate? 42 years, sir, since I was a boy. And in those 42 years, did you ever miss rent before?
No, sir. Never. Elias looked at the old man, saw the pride warring with desperation, saw himself in 20 years if he kept living the way he had been, alone, cold, measuring worth in productivity. The rent is forgiven, he said, for as long as you need. Thomas stared. Sir?
You've earned it. 42 years of service. That's worth more than 6 months of missed rent. He stood. And if you need help with repairs or anything else, you let Mrs. Penrose know. Understood?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Elias left before the man could cry. He found Leora in the library. I went to see Thomas Garrett, he said. She looked up. And? You were right. About all of it. He sat across from her. I forgave the rent. He can stay as long as he needs.
Leora's expression was unreadable. Why? Because you were right. I was treating him the same way I treated you. And if I'm trying to be different, I have to actually be different. Not just with you. With everyone. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, that was the right thing to do. I know, I should have seen it without you pointing it out. But you didn't, and you do now. That's what matters.
Something in her expression had shifted. Not quite trust, but closer. Like a door opening slightly. Elias felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe this was working after all, Shets. Week 4 brought something unexpected. Leora started smiling at him. Not forced smiles or polite ones. Real ones. Small and tentative, but genuine. She touched his arm once during a conversation, just briefly, but the contact sent electricity through him. They were sitting in the drawing room one evening when she said, "Can I ask you something? Anything? Do you remember our wedding day?" The question surprised him. Of course. What do you remember about it? Elias thought back. It rained. Your dress was cream-colored. The ceremony was short. Your father looked relieved to be rid of debt. That's all? What else should I remember? I don't know. I just wondered if you noticed me at all that day. I noticed you were nervous. I was terrified. She set down her book. I kept thinking you'd change your mind, that you'd realize you were making a mistake. Why would I think that? Because I'm not... She stopped. Because I'm nothing special. Plain, quiet. Not what someone like you should marry. You're not plain. Elias, you're not. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things. He leaned forward. You want to know what I actually remember about our wedding day? I remember thinking you looked scared and deciding that was normal, that all brides were nervous. I didn't think about why you were scared. Didn't occur to me that you were walking into a marriage with a stranger who'd given you no reason to trust him. He paused. I was oblivious and cruel without meaning to be. And I'm sorry for that. Leora's eyes were bright. You couldn't have known. I could have asked, could have cared enough to wonder, but I didn't. He reached across the space between them, stopped short of touching her hand. I'm trying to be someone who asks now, who wonders, who cares. She looked at his hand, then at his face. I know you are. Is it working? Yes. The admission seemed to cost her something. I didn't want it to. I wanted to stay angry, protected. But you're making it very difficult. Good. She laughed. That sound again. Don't be smug. I'm not smug. I'm terrified this won't last. Me too. The honesty hung between them. Then Leora did something that stopped his heart. She reached out and took his hand. The contact was warm, tentative. Her fingers were smaller than his, calloused from garden work he'd never noticed her doing. 1 month is almost up, she said quietly. I know. I'm supposed to decide if I'm staying or leaving. I know that too. Have you thought about what happens if I leave? Every day. And? Elias looked at their joined hands. And I'll survive. But I won't be the same. Because knowing you, actually knowing you, changed something. Made me realize what I've been missing my whole life. Which is? Connection. Someone who sees me and doesn't run. Someone I want to see back. He met her eyes. I spent 34 years thinking I didn't need anyone. Then you left and I realized I need you. Specifically, you. Not just a wife. Not just someone to run the house. You.
Leora's breath caught. I know it's not enough. I know 1 month doesn't erase 6 months of damage. But it's the truth. They sat like that, hands joined, neither moving. Then Leora said, I'm not leaving. Elias's heart stopped. What? I'm staying. Not because the month is up, because I want to. She squeezed his hand. You're not perfect. You still mess up, but you're trying in ways I never thought you would. And that matters. You're sure? No, but I'm choosing to be here anyway. That's all either of us gets, choosing each day. No guarantees. I'll take it. Good. Because I'm not making this easy. I don't want easy. I just want you. She smiled. You have me. For now, don't mess it up. I'll try not to. Try harder than that. Yes, ma'am. She laughed again, and Elias felt something that might have been joy. Spring came slowly to Cornwall. The roses in the south garden bloomed for the first time in years. Leora spent hours there, hands in soil, teaching Elias what the gardener had taught her. They worked side by side, learning each other through small moments. The way she hummed when she was concentrating. The way he forgot to eat when focused on a problem. The way they both went quiet near the cliffs, finding peace in violence. One afternoon in April, they were in the garden when Leora said, I want to do something. What? Hire a teacher for the village children. Elias looked up from the rose bush he'd been pruning. A teacher? Most of them can't read, can barely write their names. They need education. That's expensive. We can afford it, and it matters. She met his eyes. You asked me once what I wanted to be as a child. I wanted to be a teacher, to make people feel seen. I can't do that directly, but I can make it possible for someone else. It was the first time she'd asked him for something that wasn't about them. That was purely her own desire. Elias realized this was a test. Do it, he said. Really? Yes, find someone good. Set up a schoolroom, whatever you need. It'll cost. I don't care what it costs. You want to do this. That's enough. Leora stared at him. Then she smiled, full and bright and utterly transforming. Thank you. Don't thank me. This is your project. I'm just funding it. She kissed his cheek. It was quick, impulsive, over before he could react, but the warmth of it stayed. What was that for? He asked. For listening, for seeing what I want and not dismissing it. That's basic decency. It's more than you gave me before, more than most men would give at all. She went back to her roses. I'll start making arrangements tomorrow. Elias watched her work, feeling something expand in his chest. This was what he'd been missing, not just her presence, but her happiness, her purpose, the light that came into her eyes when she talked about things she cared about. He'd spent 6 months dimming that light. Now he was learning to help it grow. By May, the village school was operational. Leora had hired a young woman from the next county, someone patient and passionate about education. The children loved her. Their parents were grateful, and Leora bloomed. She spent mornings visiting the school, afternoons in the garden, evenings with Elias. She laughed more, smiled constantly, became someone Elias barely recognized from the ghost who'd lived in his house 6 months ago. You're different, he told her one night. So are you. Is it good different? Yes. She curled into his side. They'd progressed to sitting together on the settee, small touches that felt monumental. You're still difficult, still stubborn. But you're trying, and that makes all the difference. I'm terrified I'll backslide. You probably will sometimes, but as long as you catch yourself and fix it, we'll be all right. You're very forgiving. I'm practical. No one's perfect, but effort counts. Elias kissed her forehead. She leaned into it. These small intimacies felt like miracles. Summer brought their first real fight since she'd stayed. Elias made a decision about the estate without consulting Leora, selling off some unused land to a neighboring property. It was good business. It was also exactly what he'd promised not to do. She found out from Mrs. Penrose. You sold the western acreage? Elias looked up from his study. Yes. Good price. Smart move. Without telling me. The ice in her voice made him realize his mistake instantly. It was business. We've had this conversation. This is my home too. Big decisions get discussed.
That was the agreement. You're right. I should have told you. You should have asked me. You don't care about estate management. I care about being included in decisions that affect our home. That's the point. She crossed her arms. You're backsliding. It was one decision. That's how it starts. One decision becomes 10. 10 becomes you shutting me out entirely. I've seen this before. Elias felt frustration rise. You're overreacting. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, you just proved you haven't changed as much as I thought. That's not fair. Neither is making unilateral decisions after promising not to. They stared at each other. Finally, Elias said, "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to remember that this isn't just your house. It's ours. And ours means I get a voice. Even in business decisions, especially in those, because they affect both of us." He wanted to argue, wanted to defend his choice, but she was right. "I'll renegotiate the sale," he said quietly. "What?" "I'll tell them I need to reconsider, that I didn't consult my wife and that was wrong, and I'll bring the whole thing to you before deciding." Leora looked stunned. "You'd do that?" "Yes, because you're right, and because I promised to be different. That means actually being different, even when it's inconvenient." She studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Thank you. I'm sorry. For backsliding, for assuming, for all of it. I know, just don't do it again. I'll try. Try harder." "Yes, ma'am." She left. Elias sat at his desk and realized he was shaking. That had been close. Too close. He'd almost lost her again over something stupid, but he'd caught himself. Or she'd caught him. Either way, they'd survived it. That had to count for something. By autumn, Leora's favorite season, they'd found something that looked like balance. Not perfect. They still fought, still had moments where old patterns crept in. But they talked through it, fixed it, kept choosing each other. One October evening, they were walking the cliffs. The wind was brutal, the sky heavy with coming storms. But Leora looked peaceful in a way that made Elias's chest ache. "Do you remember the first time you found me up here?" she asked. "Yes. You looked like you were trying to disappear." "I was. This was the only place that felt honest. And now? Now it just feels like home." She looked at him. "Because you're here." Elias pulled her close. She fit against him perfectly, something he'd never noticed before because he'd never tried. "I love you," he said. The word surprised both of them. Leora pulled back. "What?" "I love you. I don't know when it happened. Probably somewhere between you leaving and me realizing I'd ruined everything. But it's true." He cupped her face. "I love you. Not because you run the house or because you're my wife. Because you're you. Because you make me want to be better. Because you're the only person who's ever made me feel like I'm enough exactly as I am while still pushing me to grow." Leora's eyes were wet. "You're sure?" "Completely. Because if you're just saying it, I'm not. I mean it. Every word." She kissed him. It was their first real kiss. Not the awkward wedding kiss. Not the perfunctory bedroom visits. This was real, desperate and certain, and full of everything they'd both been too afraid to say. When they pulled apart, Leora was crying. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't want to. I tried not to. But I do." "When did you know?" "When you forgave Thomas Garrett's rent. When I realized you were actually changing. That you saw people, saw me, as more than functions." She smiled through tears. "You're still difficult. Still stubborn. Still make me want to strangle you sometimes. But you're mine, and I'm choosing you, every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Especially then." They stood on the cliffs where Leora had once come to feel something other than numbness, and Elias understood what he'd been missing his whole life. Not control, not perfection, just this, just her, just the choice to keep showing up. Chet. Winter came again. But this time the house wasn't cold. Leora had transformed it, not with grand renovations, but with small touches. Flowers in the hall, music in the drawing room, laughter in spaces that had been silent for generations. The staff noticed.
The tenants noticed. The whole county noticed. Mrs. Varrick had brought Varrick Hall back to life. And Mr. Varrick had finally become someone worth living with. On their first anniversary, Elias took Leora back to the garden where he'd been working when she'd returned. The roses were magnificent now, green and thriving and beautiful. "I wanted to give you something," he said. "The roses are enough." "No, they're not." He pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, simple gold with a single green stone. "Your favorite color. For the woman who taught me what actually matters." Leora's breath caught. "Elias, you already have a wedding ring. This is different. This is for the marriage we're actually building, the one that's real." She let him slip it on her finger. It fit perfectly. "I love you," she said. "I love you too. Even when you're difficult. Especially when I'm difficult. Especially then." They kissed in the garden they'd built together, surrounded by roses that had survived bad soil and worse care to bloom anyway. Just like them, the house stood behind them. No longer a fortress, but a home. The cliffs raged in the distance. The sea crashed against rocks that would stand for centuries. And inside Varrick Hall, for the first time in generations, there was warmth. Not because the structure had changed, but because the people inside it had. Elias Varrick had learned to see. Leora Varrick had learned to be seen. And together, they'd built something that neither of them could have created alone. A marriage. A real one. Forged in distance and silence, and the choice to keep trying when it would have been easier to quit. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that was enough.